This is a shocking, real-life story that happened right here at San Antonio, Texas. A beloved grandmother, a woman who spent her life caring for others, now lifeless on her own kitchen floor, her skull shattered, blood seeping into the cracks of the tile. And the murder weapon? A hammer. But the most chilling part, the person responsible was her own granddaughter. What could drive someone to commit such a horrifying act? Was it rage? Was it madness? Or was there something even more sinister lurking beneath the surface? Tonight we unravel the shocking case of Tamera Laws, the woman who turned a family home into a crime scene that would haunt the city forever. Before we jump into this incredible story, take a moment to comment below where you're tuning in from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more shocking true crime cases that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. Your support helps us share these powerful stories with the world. Now, let's go back to the beginning. To understand how a moment of unthinkable violence shattered an entire family, we have to go back to a time before the crime scene photos, before the sirens, before the gut-wrenching 911 call that would send chills through an entire community. It starts with Doris Ruth Novella, a woman whose life was a testament to kindness, patience, and the unwavering belief that family comes first. At 70 years old, she had spent decades shaping young minds as a schoolteacher. And not just any teacher, the kind students never forget. The kind who stayed after class to tutor struggling kids, who carried extra snacks in her purse for the children who didn't have enough to eat, who believed in second chances, even when they weren't deserving. She had spent her life giving her time, giving her love, giving parts of herself to anyone who needed them. But more than anything, she gave to one person, her granddaughter Tamera Laws. From the time Tamera was a little girl, Doris was more than just a grandmother. She was a lifeline, a mother figure, a protector. When Tamera's parents couldn't be there, it was Doris who stepped in. She was the one who made sure there was food on the table, clothes on her back, and warmth in her heart. No matter what happened, no matter how bad things got, Doris was always there to pick up the pieces. But what happens when love turns into obligation? When patience stretches beyond its limits? When a lifetime of sacrifices for someone turns into a trap? Because while Doris was the picture of generosity, the truth was she was carrying a burden few people truly understood. And that burden had a name. Tamera Laws. At 28 years old, Tamera was a woman caught in a cycle she couldn't seem to escape. A cycle of instability, outbursts, and poor decisions that had left her bouncing between jobs, relationships, and places to stay. She struggled with mental health issues, something that had been whispered about but never fully addressed. The kind of struggle that left her unpredictable, volatile, dangerous. Time and time again, when she had nowhere else to turn, she came back to the one person who never turned her away, her grandmother. And Doris, ever forgiving, ever hopeful, always let her in, no matter how bad things got, no matter how many warning signs there were, no matter how much the people around her begged her to stop. But here's the thing about opening your home to someone battling their demons. Sometimes you end up inviting those demons in with them. And by the time February 2020 rolled around, those demons had taken root. They were lurking in the shadows of that quiet Texas home, waiting, watching, until, finally, they took over completely. The question wasn't if something terrible would happen. It was only a matter of when. A quiet neighborhood in San Antonio, Texas. The kind of place where people feel safe leaving their doors unlocked. The kind of place where tragedies feel distant. Something that happens in another city, to another family. But on this day, the illusion of safety was shattered. It started with a phone call. A 911 operator answered to the sound of panicked breathing, a neighbor, voice shaking, struggling to get the words out. I think she's dead. Police were dispatched immediately. It wasn't long before sirens cut through the stillness of the morning, flashing lights reflecting off the windows of unsuspecting houses. Officers rushed to the address, expecting anything, but not what they were about to find. When they entered the home, the air was thick with something unmistakable, the metallic scent of blood. And there, in the living room, lying on the floor in an unnatural position, was Doris Ruth Novella. She had been brutally beaten. The kind of violence that isn't random, the kind of violence that isn't just about rage. It's about something deeper, something personal. Blood splattered across the walls, staining the once pristine carpet, and next to her body the weapon that had been used to end her life. A hammer. Left behind, as if whoever had done this didn't even care to hide it. But there was something else, something that sent an even colder chill down the spines of the officers. No signs of forced entry. This wasn't a home invasion. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors. Nothing had been stolen. Which could only mean one thing. The person who did this was someone she knew, someone she trusted entirely. And then they found her, Tamera Laws, the granddaughter Doris had spent her life caring for, the young woman she had never given up on, no matter how many chances she had wasted. There she was, in the same house, just a few feet away from the woman who had loved her unconditionally, sitting on the floor, motionless. Her expression was blank, eyes unfocused. As if she wasn't even there. Officers called out to her, no response. They stepped closer. She was breathing, but she wasn't reacting. It was as if her mind had shut down completely. The blood on her hands, the splatters on her clothes, evidence screaming louder than any words ever could. And yet she sat there. The officers crouched down beside her. "Tamera, can you hear me?" Nothing. She was in a dazed, unresponsive state. Some officers would later describe it as eerie, others unsettling. She wasn't crying, she wasn't pleading her innocence. She wasn't running or trying to hide. It was as if she had been completely drained of emotion, or maybe she had never felt any to begin with. But inside that house, one thing was clear. This wasn't just a crime scene. This was a moment frozen in time, a tragedy that had been years in the making, a nightmare that had finally reached its breaking point. And as officers secured the scene, as paramedics confirmed what everyone already knew, that Doris Novella was gone. One question lingered in the air, heavier than the silence between them. What happened inside that house? What had led to this unthinkable act? And more importantly, why? The answers would be more disturbing than anyone could have imagined. As investigators combed through the details of Doris Novella's murder, one question loomed over everything. Why? What could have possibly driven Tamera Laws to commit such a gruesome act against the very woman who had spent decades loving, protecting, and providing for her? To understand that, we have to go back to the fractured relationship between a grandmother who never gave up and a granddaughter who always seemed to be on the edge of destruction. Tamera Laws wasn't just another troubled young woman. She was a storm waiting to break. Those who knew her described her as unpredictable, volatile, someone who could shift from calm to violent in the blink of an eye. And Doris? She had witnessed it all firsthand. Police records painted a dark picture. Tamera had a history of outbursts. Violent, uncontrollable rage that had led to multiple run-ins with the law. Neighbors recalled hearing screaming matches inside the house, arguments that would shake the walls. Some had even seen Doris with bruises before, but when asked, she would always brush it off. "She's just going through a rough time," she'd say. "She doesn't mean it." But behind closed doors, the reality was far more unsettling. Doris had called the police before, more than once. Reports detailed incidents of aggression, threats, and even property damage, but every time she refused to press charges. She didn't want Tamera to go to jail. She just wanted her to get help. But Tamera wasn't interested in help. She wasn't interested in therapy. She wasn't interested in changing, and that made her dangerous. But there was something else, something that may have been the final breaking point. Money. Tamera had never been independent. She relied on Doris for everything, food, shelter, bills. She would come and go, but no matter how many times she left, she always ended up back at her grandmother's doorstep, expecting open arms and open pockets. And for years, Doris had given her just that. But lately, things had changed. Doris was growing tired. She was cutting back on the financial support, trying to push Tamera towards standing on her own 2 feet. And for someone like Tamera, someone who had never known accountability, who had never faced real consequences, that felt like betrayal. Was the murder an explosion of long brewing rage, a moment of uncontrollable fury, or was it something far worse, premeditated, calculated? An act of cold-blooded desperation. Investigators were about to uncover the truth, and when they did, it would send chills down their spines. The arrest was swift. There was no chase, no dramatic escape attempt. Tamera Laws was taken into custody without resistance, her expression as vacant as it had been when officers first found her. No tears, no remorse. Just silence. He was charged with the brutal murder of her own grandmother, Doris Novella, and now the weight of the law was bearing down on her. The evidence was overwhelming. Blood on her clothes, the hammer still sitting next to Doris's lifeless body. No forced entry, no sign of an intruder. It all pointed to one undeniable fact. Tamera had done this. But as the case moved forward, Tamera and her legal team introduced a new narrative, one that would change everything. She wasn't a cold-blooded killer, they claimed. She was sick. She was suffering from a severe psychotic episode. She had lost touch with reality, and in that state of mental unraveling, she had done something unthinkable. The insanity plea, one of the most controversial defenses in the legal system. If successful, it could mean the difference between life in prison and being committed to a psychiatric facility. But proving insanity in a court of law? That was an uphill battle. The prosecution wasn't buying it. They argued that this wasn't some spontaneous act of madness. This was murder. And more than that, it was premeditated. Tamera knew what she was doing. She had thought about it. She had planned it. And they had the receipts to prove it. Investigators dug through Tamera's online activity, and what they found sent chills down their spines. In the weeks leading up to the murder, she had been searching for specific phrases, disturbing, calculated searches that painted a chilling picture of her intent. How to fake insanity in court, legal loopholes for mental illness defense, how to get away with murder if mentally ill. These weren't the searches of someone lost in a moment of delusion. These were the searches of someone looking for a way out before the crime had even been committed, a way to avoid consequences, a way to shift the narrative before the blood had even dried. And there was more. Neighbors came forward with damning testimonies. They had heard the fights, not just one or two, constant, violent, explosive arguments. The last one? Just days before the murder, screaming so intense that one neighbor even considered calling the police, but no one ever did. No one ever thought it would go this far. The prosecution painted the picture clearly. This wasn't the act of a woman in the grip of an uncontrollable psychotic break. This was rage. This was revenge. This was premeditation. And as the trial loomed ahead, the question was no longer just, did she do it? That much was clear. The real question was, would the jury believe her story? The courtroom was packed. Every seat was filled. Reporters, family members, onlookers who had followed this case from the beginning, all of them waiting to see how this chilling saga would end. At the center of it all sat Tamera Laws, the woman accused of one of the most brutal crimes imaginable. Her expression remained unreadable, a mask of detachment as the trial unfolded around her. Inside of the courtroom, Doris's family sat in quiet devastation. Her children, her friends, the people who had loved her. They had come for justice. Some clutched tissues, their eyes red from weeks of endless grief. Others stared at Tamera, their faces filled with raw anger, unable to comprehend how the young woman they once knew could have done something so monstrous. They weren't here for excuses. They wanted answers. And more than anything, they wanted justice. The prosecution wasted no time painting a damning picture. They walked the jury through every disturbing detail, the gruesome crime scene, the blood-splattered walls, the hammer left beside Doris's lifeless body. They replayed the chilling 911 call, forcing the courtroom to listen to the sheer terror in the dispatcher's voice as they processed the horror unfolding on the other end of the line. Every word felt like a dagger to Doris's grieving family, but the most powerful moments came when psychiatrists took the stand. And this is where the battle for Tamera's fate truly began. The expert, hired by the defense, argued that Tamera was in the depths of a full-blown psychotic break when she committed the crime. She wasn't in control. She wasn't even aware of what she was doing. According to them, she had suffered from untreated mental illness for years, and on that fateful night she snapped. It wasn't murder, they claimed. It was the tragic result of an untreated condition spiraling out of control. But then came the prosecution's expert. And his testimony was a turning point. According to him, Tamera Laws was not a woman lost in the fog of insanity. She was fully aware of her actions. She had planned this, she had thought about it, and she had searched for ways to get away with it. The Google searches, the past violent outbursts, the financial motive, all of it pointed to cold, calculated murder. As the experts spoke, the jury remained stone-faced, absorbing every word. But the weight of the evidence was impossible to ignore. The final moments of the trial were gut-wrenching. The prosecution and defense made their final pleas. Doris's family members took the stand, their voices breaking as they begged the jury to see the truth. And then the courtroom fell silent. Tamera Laws, once a free woman, now waited to hear her fate. The jury filed back in, their expressions unreadable. The judge asked the foreperson to rise. The entire room held its breath. And then the verdict was read. What did the jury decide? Was Tamera truly insane, or was she a cold-blooded killer? Comment your thoughts below, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the final revelation of this shocking case. The murder of Doris Ruth Novella has left a trail of devastation not only within her immediate family, but across the community. Doris, a beloved 70-year-old grandmother, was someone many had trusted and respected. Her untimely death at the hands of her own granddaughter, Tamera Laws, has rocked everyone who knew her. For the family, the pain is palpable, and the emotional scars will likely linger for years to come. Tamera's legal journey began in 2020, but now, in February 2025, the case is finally in trial. The stakes couldn't be higher. Tamera is charged with murder, facing a potential life sentence if convicted. However, her defense team is working to have her declared not guilty by reason of insanity. They claim that Tamera's actions were the result of severe mental health issues, psychosis, hallucinations, and other forms of cognitive disarray that clouded her judgment in that moment of violence. Yet the prosecution presents a different view. They argue that Tamera's actions weren't driven by mental illness, but rather by the influence of methamphetamine use. According to them, the drugs played a crucial role in her behavior that day, and this disqualifies her from claiming insanity. The back and forth between the defense and prosecution continues to unfold in the courtroom, with each side painting a different picture of Tamera's state of mind leading up to the brutal act. If Tamera is found guilty, she could face a life sentence in prison, but if she is acquitted on grounds of insanity, she will likely be committed to a psychiatric facility for an indefinite period. The outcome of this trial will determine the next chapter for Tamera, but it will also impact the family that has already suffered so much. On the other hand, the emotional toll on Doris's family is immeasurable. The murder of a loved one, especially in such a violent and unexpected way, often results in grief so deep it can tear families apart. Doris's relatives must now grapple not only with the loss of a woman who meant so much to them, but with the added pain of knowing that the person who took her life was family. These types of tragedies can lead to long-term emotional and psychological struggles for survivors. Feelings of anger, betrayal, guilt, and helplessness. It's possible that some of Doris's family members will suffer from PTSD, unable to reconcile the horror they've experienced. They may also face social isolation, distancing themselves from others due to the weight of their grief. And then there's the broader community. The neighborhood, once a place of comfort and familiarity, now stands in the shadow of this horrific event. Crimes like this erode trust within a community, making residents more fearful and wary. People may become more anxious about their safety, hesitant to open their doors, and less likely to engage with their neighbors. The sense of community that once existed may slowly unravel as the aftermath of the crime continues to reverberate through the town. So, where does this case leave us in the grand scheme of things? Could it have been prevented? With Tamera's history of mental health struggles, were there warning signs along the way? Could Doris have known that the granddaughter she'd once loved and cared for was capable of such violence? And ultimately, what about the role of addiction in this case? Did the drugs Tamera was allegedly using tip her into a psychotic state? Or was there something more to it? As the trial continues, questions remain unanswered. What will the final verdict be? And what consequences will it bring, not only for Tamera but for the grieving family and the community still reeling from the shock of this unimaginable tragedy? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below.